Sergeant Eric Matthews had never been one for the spotlight. His life had always revolved around service and duty, not personal glory. Enlisting in the Army right after high school, Eric was driven by a sense of purpose, eager to prove himself. After years of deployments, tours, and countless missions, he had built a solid reputation as a dedicated soldier, someone who could be relied upon when things got tough. But after a grueling tour in the Middle East, all Eric wanted was to go home. His last mission had been one that would undoubtedly make headlines, though he wished it hadn't. It was a covert rescue operation in the middle of a firefight, deep in enemy territory. What started as a routine mission quickly spiraled into chaos, with lives on the line and no clear way out. Faced with uncertainty, Eric had taken charge, coordinating the extraction of a group of soldiers pinned down by enemy fire. Against all odds, the mission had succeeded, but the scars, both visible and invisible, had lingered. Eric had received a commendation for bravery, and whispers of his actions circulated among peers and superiors alike. But now, he only desired a quiet return to civilian life, to be reunited with his family, and to leave the battlefield behind. The bustling atmosphere of the international airport was a stark contrast to the war-torn landscapes he had become accustomed to. Eric walked through the terminal, his military uniform drawing some stares, but mostly going unnoticed in the sea of travelers. A single duffel bag hung over his shoulder, its weight familiar and comforting after months spent in the desert. It felt lighter now that his deployment was officially over. As he glanced at his boarding pass, he was surprised to see it read first class. Eric wasn't used to flying in luxury. In fact, he hadn't expected this at all. Perhaps it was a last-minute upgrade, a gesture from the airline to honor his service. He wasn't one to make a fuss, so he accepted the upgrade with quiet gratitude. A first-class seat sounded exactly like what he needed after the past year. A space to stretch out, close his eyes, and hopefully drift off to sleep for a few hours. As the gate agent called for first-class passengers to board, Eric hung back, waiting until most others had gone ahead. He disliked drawing attention to himself. When it was finally time, he approached the gate, handing his boarding pass to the agent, who smiled warmly and thanked him for his service. It was a brief moment of respect, but it passed quickly, just the way Eric preferred it. Walking down the jet bridge, his mind drifted to thoughts of home. His wife, Sarah, had endured so much during his deployment. She had managed the house, cared for their two young children, Tyler and Grace, and dealt with all the worries that came with having a husband in a war zone. Each time he left, it felt like they had grown a little more by the time he returned. He couldn't wait to see their faces, hold them close, and try to make up for all the missed birthdays, soccer games, and bedtime stories. As he stepped onto the plane, Eric was greeted by the sterile coolness of the cabin and the soft murmur of passengers settling into their seats. Walking past rows of first-class seats, he eyed the plush leather and wide space between the aisles, grateful for the unexpected comfort that awaited him. But just as he reached his row, a flight attendant appeared in front of him, her crisp uniform highlighting her professionalism. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice polite yet firm. "Are you sure you're in the right section? First class is for..." Eric cut her off, not in the mood to argue or explain himself. "I've got a first-class ticket," he said calmly, holding out his boarding pass for her to see. The flight attendant took the pass, but only glanced at it for a second before handing it back, her expression doubtful. "I'm sorry, but it seems like there's been some sort of mistake. You might want to check with the gate agent." "First class is reserved for..." Eric interrupted again, trying to keep his frustration in check. "This is my seat. 3A. The moment hung heavy with unspoken tension. He had faced far more stressful situations in his life, where life and death were decided in seconds, but somehow this small moment of prejudice, this quiet assumption that he didn't belong, cut deeper than he expected. Eric had encountered moments like this before, times when people looked at him and saw only the color of his skin or his military uniform and assumed he didn't belong. Just then, another voice chimed in from 2 rows back. "Sergeant Matthews? Is that you?" Eric turned, surprised to see an older man standing up, his face filled with recognition. The man, dressed in a suit, exuded the aura of someone who had served. "Lieutenant Colonel Harris?" Eric replied, the name flooding back after a moment. He had served under Harris years ago in Afghanistan, and though it had been more than a decade since they last crossed paths, the memory was vivid. It's been a long time, Sergeant, Harris said, walking over and clapping Eric on the shoulder. I heard about what you did on that last mission. You saved a lot of lives over there. A wave of discomfort washed over Eric, but he nodded in acknowledgement. Just doing my job, sir. Harris wasn't finished. He turned to the flight attendant, his voice taking on the tone of someone used to giving orders. This man belongs here. He's a hero. If anyone deserves to be in first class, it's him. The flight attendant's face flushed with embarrassment as she took a step back clearly, realizing her mistake. I'm so sorry, sir, she stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. Please take your seat. Eric waved her off, not wanting to make the situation more uncomfortable than it already was. It's fine, he said quietly. I just want to sit down. As he settled into his seat, the tension in the cabin seemed to shift. Other passengers who had been watching the exchange began to murmur amongst themselves. Some glanced at Eric with curiosity, while others now regarded him with newfound respect, realizing they were sharing a flight with someone who had risked his life for his country. A few discreetly pulled out their phones, capturing the moment for social media, turning it into a spectacle. However, Eric wanted nothing to do with the attention. He was tired of the spotlight, tired of the battles he had fought both abroad and at home. Leaning back in his seat, he closed his eyes, willing the world to fade away for a few hours. As the plane took off and reached cruising altitude, the captain came over the intercom, his voice friendly and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us today. We have a smooth flight ahead, so sit back and relax. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge that we have a very special passenger on board, Sergeant Eric Matthews, a decorated war hero who has just returned from serving our country. On behalf of the entire crew, we'd like to thank you for your service, Sergeant. The captain's words hung in the air for a moment before the cabin erupted in applause. It started with a few claps, but soon swelled into an ovation, with some passengers standing, others turning in their seats to look at Eric. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, not from pride, but from discomfort. He hadn't asked for any of this. All he had wanted was a quiet flight home. Across the aisle, a young woman smiled at him. Thank you for your service, she said softly. Eric nodded but remained silent, his mind elsewhere. He was grateful, of course, for the appreciation, but he couldn't shake the feeling of disconnect. These people had no idea what he had been through, the things he had seen, or the horrors he had faced. The memories haunted him, and no amount of applause could erase them. As the flight continued, Eric did his best to settle into the routine of travel. The hum of the engines and the soft murmur of passengers around him blurred into the background as he tried to relax, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the incident with the flight attendant. He wasn't angry at her, not really. She had made an assumption rooted in prejudice and ignorance. He had encountered far worse in his life, yet the moment stuck with him. Behind him, two men were quietly discussing what had just transpired, their voices just loud enough for Eric to overhear. I can't believe she thought he didn't belong here, one of them whispered. Did you hear what that guy said? A war hero? Yeah, but that's how it goes, isn't it? The other replied. People see a black man in first class and assume he's not supposed to be there. Eric's jaw tightened. He wasn't surprised by their conversation, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. It served as a reminder that no matter what he had given or how many battles he had fought for his country, there were still those who would only see him for the color of his skin. He had been fighting two battles his whole life, one on the battlefield and one at home. As the flight attendants began serving drinks and snacks, the woman who had thanked him earlier turned to him again. My brother's in the army, she said quietly, her eyes filled with a mix of pride and worry. He's over in Afghanistan right now. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. Eric met her gaze, and for a moment, the walls he had built around himself and began to crumble. Tell him to stay safe, he replied, the weight of her words resonating deep within him. And thank you for supporting him. It means a lot to families like ours. She nodded, a smile breaking through her initial nervousness. I will. I hope your family is doing well, too. He smiled back, a hint of warmth spreading through him. For a brief moment, he felt connected, seen, and appreciated. It was something he had longed for, but in the tumult of his thoughts, it was fleeting. As the flight progressed, Eric found himself reflecting on the impact of his service, not just on the battlefield, but also on his life and the lives of those around him. Maybe there was value in sharing his story, in reminding people that soldiers were more than just uniforms or headlines. They were fathers, brothers, husbands, and friends, each carrying their own burdens and scars. As the plane began its descent into the city, Eric's thoughts shifted to the family waiting for him at home. He imagined their joyous reunion, the sound of his children's laughter filling the air. The thought brought a smile to his face, and for the first time that day, he felt a glimmer of hope. The moment the plane landed, Eric's heart raced with anticipation. He had longed for this moment, the embrace of his family, the sense of normalcy that had eluded him for so long. As he disembarked, he scanned the crowded terminal for familiar faces. There she was, Sarah, standing near the exit, holding a colorful sign that read, "Welcome home, Dad." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to him. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the chaos of the airport faded away. He rushed toward her, dropping his duffel bag to pull her into a tight embrace. "Daddy!" Grace squealed as she broke free from Sarah's grasp, running toward him with her arms outstretched. He knelt down just in time to catch her, lifting her high into the air. "Hey, Pumpkin, I missed you." He kissed her forehead, feeling her warmth and energy fill his heart with joy. "Me too." Tyler, his older son, approached more cautiously, but the smile on his face said everything. "You're back for good, right?" "Absolutely," Eric promised, pulling Tyler in for a hug as well. He felt the weight of the past year lift off his shoulders, replaced by the warmth of family and love. As they made their way out of the airport, Sarah filled him in on everything he had missed, the kids' milestones, neighborhood gossip, and the little victories that had kept her spirits high while he was away. It was a whirlwind of information, but Eric cherished every word. Their drive home felt surreal, as if he had stepped back into a dream. The familiar streets of their neighborhood, the cozy houses with the glow of evening lights, all felt like a comfort he had longed for. When they arrived home, the door swung open, revealing a scene of normalcy that warmed his heart. "Welcome home," Sarah announced, and the children burst into the living room, leading the way with laughter and shouts. As they entered, Eric was greeted by the sight of their home photos of their family on the walls, Tyler's soccer trophies lining the shelf, and the scent of Sarah's cooking wafting through the air. It was all so familiar, yet he felt as though he was seeing it for the first time. "Let's have a celebration dinner," Sarah suggested, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Your favorite, of course? Are we having lasagna?" Grace chimed in, her excitement infectious. Eric chuckled. "Of course. We have to celebrate properly, don't we?" As the family settled around the dinner table, Eric took a moment to absorb the scene. Their laughter, the clinking of forks against plates, and the warmth of their togetherness filled him with a sense of gratitude he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a reminder of why he had fought so hard and what he had missed while he was away. After dinner, while the kids played in the living room, Sarah pulled Eric aside. "How are you feeling?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "I'm okay," he replied, his tone sincere. "Just trying to adjust. It's been a long year." She nodded, understanding. "You don't have to pretend with me. I know it's not easy coming back after everything." "I know," Eric admitted, feeling the weight of his experiences. "I just want to be present for you and the kids. I don't want to carry any of that stuff home." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. "You've been through so much, Eric. It's okay to talk about it if you need to. We're here for you no matter what." He appreciated her support, but didn't want to burden her with the darkness he carried. "I'll be all right," he assured her, forcing a smile. "Just give me time." "Of course," she replied, squeezing his arm before returning to the kids. As the night went on, Eric immersed himself in family life, joining in their games and laughter, allowing the warmth of their love to wash over him. Days turned into weeks as Eric settled back into civilian life. He embraced every moment, cherishing the mundane routines, helping Tyler with his homework, watching Grace's dance recitals, and cooking dinner with Sarah. Each moment was a gift he had longed for, and he drank it all in. However, despite the joy, shadows loomed just beneath the surface. The memories of war refused to fade, haunting him in quiet moments when the house was still. Sleep eluded him, filled with flashes of combat, the cries of his comrades, and the faces of those he had lost. Each night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the burden of guilt settle heavily on his chest. On one particularly restless night, Eric found himself pacing the living room, the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. He tried to distract himself, flipping through channels on the television, but nothing could pull him from the storm brewing in his mind. He thought about his friends, those who hadn't made it back. They had fought alongside him, laughed with him, and shared their hopes and dreams for the future. Yet, here he was standing on the other side, alive but haunted. In a moment of desperation, Eric picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he needed, Sergeant Alex Rivera. They had been through everything together in the last tour, and Alex had been the one who pulled him from the wreckage of a near-fatal ambush. The phone rang, echoing through the silence of the house. Eric held his breath, hoping Alex would pick up. After a few rings, he finally heard the familiar voice on the other end. "Matthews? Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," Eric replied, relief flooding through him. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" "I'm good. Just trying to adjust, you know." "It's weird being back," Alex said, a hint of shared understanding in his tone. "Yeah," Eric agreed, his heart heavy. "It's tough. I feel like I'm missing pieces of myself." "Me too," Alex admitted. "But we made it, man. That's what matters." They spoke for hours, sharing stories, reliving memories, and discussing the challenges of transitioning back to normal life. Alex's voice was a lifeline, reminding Eric that he wasn't alone in this fight. Eventually, they hung up, and Eric felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in weeks. Though the shadows still lingered, talking to Alex had lightened the load just a bit. It was a reminder that healing was a process, one he wouldn't have to face alone. As the weeks passed, Eric tried to reintegrate into his new life, but the shadows of the past continued to whisper in his ear. They crept into his dreams, manifesting as visions that left him cold and shaking upon waking. He often found himself replaying moments from his deployment, reliving the horrors and the camaraderie that had defined that chapter of his life. During the day, he filled his time with activities to distract himself, taking the kids to the park, volunteering at their school, and spending evenings with Sarah. But each night, he faced the darkness alone. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Eric sat on the porch, the quietness enveloping him like a shroud. The cool breeze brushed against his skin, but it did little to soothe the tempest inside him. He could hear laughter from the neighbors' houses, the sounds of families enjoying their time together, and the contrast made his heart ache. As he sipped his drink, he couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that settled in his chest. He had so much to be grateful for: a loving wife, beautiful children, and a home filled with love. But every time he looked in the mirror, he was reminded of the soldier he had been and the things he had done. Just then, Sarah stepped out onto the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Hey, what are you thinking about?" she asked softly, sensing his turmoil. "Nothing, just it's quiet out here," he replied, trying to mask the heaviness in his tone. She sat down beside him, their shoulders touching. "You know you could talk to me about anything, right? I want to help." Eric looked at her, feeling the warmth of her presence, and realized how lucky he was to have someone who cared so deeply. "It's just sometimes I feel like I'm not the same person anymore. Like I'm lost." "You've been through so much," she replied gently. "It's normal to feel that way. But you're still you, Eric. You're still the man I fell in love with. You just need time to adjust." He took a deep breath, allowing her words to sink in. "I want to be the father and husband you all deserve. I don't want my past to define me." "It won't," she assured him, reaching for his hand. You're here now, and that's what matters. We'll face this together. In that moment, Eric felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Maybe he didn't have to face his demons alone. Maybe he could share the burden with Sarah and let her help him heal. Recognizing that he couldn't navigate this journey alone, Eric made the brave decision to seek professional help. After discussing it with Sarah, he called a local therapist who specializes in PTSD and military service-related issues. The thought of opening up about his experiences terrified him, but he knew it was a necessary step. The day of his first appointment arrived, and he found himself sitting in a small, quiet room, the walls adorned with soothing colors and abstract art. The therapist, Dr. Lisa Harrington, welcomed him with a warm smile, creating an atmosphere of safety and understanding. "Thank you for coming in today, Eric," she began gently. "I know it can be difficult to take this first step. I just want to understand why I'm feeling this way," Eric admitted, his voice wavering slightly. "I thought coming home would fix everything." Dr. Harrington nodded. "It's common to believe that, but the reality is that transitioning back to civilian life after military service can be incredibly challenging. Let's explore some of the feelings you've been having." As the session progressed, Eric found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He shared his experiences in combat, the moments of fear and adrenaline, and the bonds he had formed with his fellow soldiers. Dr. Harrington listened attentively, guiding him gently through the layers of his emotions. They discussed the weight of guilt he carried for surviving when others had not, and how those memories shaped his everyday life. By the end of the session, Eric felt lighter, as if he had finally taken a step toward healing. Dr. Harrington encouraged him to continue attending sessions and suggested integrating mindfulness techniques into his daily routine to help manage anxiety. "I'll try," he promised, feeling a flicker of determination ignite within him. Over the next few weeks, he continued his sessions, slowly peeling back the layers of his past. With each meeting, he felt more empowered to face the shadows that had haunted him for so long. As the months passed, Eric began to integrate the skills he learned in therapy into his life. He embraced mindfulness practices, finding solace in meditation and deep breathing exercises. Each morning, he took a few moments to ground himself before the day began, a simple ritual that made a world of difference. In addition to his personal growth, he became more involved with his children's activities. He volunteered as an assistant coach for Tyler's soccer team, relishing the opportunity to bond with his son and other parents. He also attended Grace's dance recitals, cheering her on from the front row, fully present in the moment. One sunny Saturday afternoon, while they were at the park, Eric noticed a group of veterans gathering for a community event. Their camaraderie drew him in, and he approached them, feeling a connection he hadn't anticipated. They shared stories of their experiences, laughter mingling with the echoes of their pasts. Joining the group was a revelation. He found solace in their understanding, knowing they had walked similar paths. They invited him to participate in a veteran support group that met weekly, and Eric eagerly accepted. The support group became a vital part of his healing journey. Each session was filled with sharing, vulnerability, and hope. They discussed their struggles, triumphs, and the complexities of adjusting to civilian life. For the first time, Eric felt seen and understood, and it made a world of difference. As time went on, Eric and Sarah navigated the ups and downs of life together. The support group offered Eric the opportunity to connect with others who understood his struggles, while therapy provided him with the tools to face his demons. One evening, after a particularly powerful session, Eric returned home feeling invigorated. He shared his experiences with Sarah, who listened with rapt attention, her eyes filled with love and understanding. "That sounds incredible," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "I'm so proud of you for taking these steps. Thank you for always being there for me," Eric replied, pulling her close. "I couldn't do this without you." The weight he had carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of hope. He realized that healing wasn't a linear path, but rather a journey filled with ups and downs. There were still hard days, but he now had a support system that made it easier to navigate. As the seasons changed, so did Eric's outlook on life. He found joy in simple moments, family dinners, laughter echoing through the house, and the unconditional love that surrounded him. The shadows of his past still lingered, but they no longer defined him. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Eric took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He glanced over at Sarah, who smiled back at him, her eyes sparkling in the fading light. "Can you believe how far we've come?" he asked, a sense of wonder in his voice. "I can," she replied, squeezing his hand. "You've come so far, and I'm proud of you for embracing this journey." Just then, the kids burst outside, laughter ringing through the air. Grace twirled around in her dance costume, while Tyler raced after her, both of them lost in their world of imagination. At that moment, Eric realized that this was his new beginning. He was not defined by his past, but by the love and resilience that surrounded him. He could be a soldier and a father, a survivor and a husband, all at once. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Eric felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was ready to embrace whatever came next, equipped with the love of his family and the strength he had discovered within himself. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on, no longer alone, but surrounded by those who loved him. The journey was far from over, but he was ready to walk it, one step at a time.